Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, and welcome to Kingdom in Retrospective. So this was a fantastic little experience that I had. It was only a couple episodes long, but it was a pretty interesting game experience. So let's go over what I thought of it in terms of all the individual parts. So first of all, let's talk about the aesthetic and the graphics of it. So I'm not sure if it was for budgetary reasons or it was a deliberate aesthetic, but as you can see, it's that chunky pixelated style. Now, what really marks this game out as different for me is the way that they've done the backgrounds and the foregrounds. The characters themselves, I think, look pretty normal, but they've added into these pixelated worlds this mist effect that goes over everything, this rain that goes over everything. The clouds and the sky in the background are all fantastic. The water effects all look very, very good, and you can see your reflection in it, the reflection of everything in the world in it. It just looks a lot better than it really has to for the sort of pixelated style. And for this simple sort of game, you could have gotten away with a very, very simplified aesthetic, but they've gone for a very atmospheric world. They've got the blood moon going across the sky that looks fantastic. They've got those weird mountain ranges in the background that you can't see, the river in the foreground, the foliage, everything like that just comes together very cleanly to make it look much, much better than a lot of other pixel games. And I actually like it just as it is. The choice in art direction was just fantastically done. Regardless of the pixel style or not, I just think that they did a very, very good job of it. So let's move on from the aesthetics of it and the look of it to the music. Obviously, there's not going to be much to say about each of the categories, but, there's a little bit to say about each of them. But let's go to the sound and the music. Now, for me, the sound and the music and all of that were very much just, to me, they were kind of utilitarian. The aesthetic of it is a little bit utilitarian in some ways, in that these chunky guys in the front and the foreground, they have a lot less sort of detail and shading and nuance to them compared to the background, the forest, the river. All of that other stuff has more nuance and background in it to me. And because of that, I think that they stick out really, really vividly. There's always a lot of light near you because of your torch, but there's always also a lot of light in your village, and there's always like light by these fires that these guys, these little campers, I guess, have. So that mixture of things really does help make that very, very obvious. The music and sound is the same. You can clearly hear the sound of the coins running through things. You can hear the sound effect of a deer getting hit, or an arrow being fired, or a catapult being shot, or enemies bounding towards you, or the portal even. All of those things make very obvious sounds, and I think that that's just tremendously useful. It makes it so that you can use both very obvious and clear visual or audio cues to navigate the game, and that sort of way it works just really makes the gameplay experience a lot smoother and a lot cleaner. Now, of course, the music itself, I feel, is okay. It's not my favorite. Like, here's the thing. It's competing with some really, really good game music this year. There's just some games that have had blow me out of the water good music this year. Like Undertale, for example, had music that I thought was amazing. The music in... what was the game that I felt had really good music? I actually felt the Beginner's Guide had really good music, but games like that, ones which, really stiff competition, so I would probably normally rate this game's music as quite high because it's quite nice and it's very atmospheric and it fits along with the game, but for now I just feel like it's more of a utility. It tells you when events are happening, when something has been accomplished or whatever, and for that purpose I actually think that it's really quite good. But I just don't think that the music holds up necessarily as much on its own. But that, again, I think is just because of the competition it's facing this year. I think that maybe if it was a different year, it would be way up there, but it's hard to tell. Moving on from there, let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of this game. Basically, the only things you need to know how to do in this game are push A, S, and D. There's no W as far as I really know. And that's all you can do to interact in this game. You can move to the left, you can move to the right, and you can drop coins. And if you drop a coin on something, something happens. But using those controls, they've managed to make quite a lot of different things occur. Like you can use coins to purchase things, like your villagers and so on and so forth. That's pretty obvious. You can move left and right to herd the deer, which is one of those little finicky bits of the mechanics that's not necessarily immediately obvious. You don't think oh, well, if I run past the deer to the right, then I can drag them back towards my villagers. No, it's one of those things that you pick up. And a lot of this game is actually quite difficult to learn, but once you've learned it, it's very simple to execute. And I think that that's sort of one of the reasons why the game's kind of short. If it had some elements that were a lot more difficult to master, could very well be seen as a more difficult game. Happened to you. But I do think that this game could definitely do with slightly more mechanics in it. Even if it was something along the lines of just more different types of villagers that you could potentially get, or something of that sort, that would potentially make the game a little bit more interesting, and especially during the harder levels in the game. Or days in the game, if you get far enough into the game, you're going to have a real bad time, and the reason is that the game keeps ramping up the difficulty, but eventually you're going to get to a point where all you've got is the ability to move to the right or left to destroy a portal using 2 knights and then 6 archers, and that never changes. If it had given you a little bit more that you could have gone out there with, that probably would have been a little bit more acceptable. But as it is, that really is all you can get out there with, which really does harm your ability to successfully complete this game at certain points in time. Now, the fact that it does make you rush probably does help the game ultimately, because the game is a fairly short experience. It's probably a game that if you're good at learning and you figure it out really quickly, you'll probably get done in maybe 10 hours. If you watch somebody else play it and figured out how they did it, you'll probably get it done in more like 5, or maybe even your first run. So, once you figured this game out, it's not that tricky to use the mechanics to your advantage, and I think that there's some sort of elegance to that, but at the same time, a little bit more complexity is what I usually like in my games, and this isn't really an exception as far as that goes. I would have liked it if they added a little bit more difficulty to it in some ways, but moving from there, the difficulty of this game is very strange. Most of it is trying to figure things out. That is how this game sort of works. And I think that that's sort of, the great thing about this game is it's sort of the discovery. It's working through it until you've found a solution that works for you, until you've figured out a way to make a kingdom that can survive. And that's not easy in this game. It's one of those things that you really need to actually think about and get to. Or, of course, I guess you could probably use a guide, but I don't think that's really necessary. Experiment 4 or 5 times, you'll probably get where you want to be. But yeah, it's just a really fantastically condensed short experience, and that's really all I have to say about it, I think, because what else is there really to say about this game? There's not a whole lot else to it. It's it's simple, it's straightforward, it does what it needs to do, and then you're basically done with it. And I think that they knew what that was going to be like, because it's not that expensive. This is one of those sort of cheaper games. You can get it for a small amount of money and have a little bit of a good time with it. So yeah, I definitely recommend this if it looks interesting to you, if you see it on Steam sale in particular. But until the next time, I hope you found this video informative. And of course, as always, I hope to see you all next time.